Well, first of all, I wanted to say this is a really cool venue to be in and a conference because, so I'm trained actually as an anthropologist and an evolutionary biologist. So seeing scientists, startups, corporates, super cool, happy to be here. So my talk is titled The Conscious Consumer. To be honest, I kind of loathe that word. So like we all probably feel this. I mean, presumably everyone has seen The Matrix, right? Keanu Reeves, great movie. The reason I started this company is that's kind of how I felt day to day. It was like in the capitalist, profit-driven society we live in, as a consumer, I was just like, I feel like I'm just being sapped of my energy every day, and I try to do these things. Like, I had a worm composting farm in my kitchen. I was running a nonprofit. I was like doing 8 things in addition to my job. And what I realized is that other than the jobs we do, it's sort of where we put our money that matters, right? Or that can create a meaningful shift, especially if we do it all together. Additionally, I was looking around sort of at the landscape. I, in addition to an evolutionary biologist, spent some time as a data scientist at a venture firm, as a market researcher, focused on emerging technologies. And there was so much amazing work being done when it came to impact investing, right? Because there's more data on public companies. But what I saw was that consumers spend $17 trillion a year on daily purchases. And there was this growing movement, which I felt in myself, that I'd like to try and use my money to make a difference, but how do I actually know if the companies I'm supporting are doing good things or things that are aligned with my personal values? Okay, so all of you probably don't need to hear this, but I'm going to zoom out a little bit. The anthropologist in me just loves thinking about these things, which is at a macro level, if we think about our country and our society, we've been around for about 250 years, which means that, and in addition, there's some really interesting social science that shows social change, and in the term I'll use here is like a revolution, right? Occurs typically every 50 to 75 years in society. And what I mean by a revolution is that there's actual meaningful structural change. So, quick history lesson. First revolution was obviously the American Revolution, independence. For those of us that were born here and went to school here, the classic term you would always hear is taxation without representation. So I think that's probably similar to how I feel a lot of people feel when they spend their money, is like we're putting our money into different companies, but we just don't really know what it's actually doing. So I said 50 to 75 years, 78 years later, Civil War. Again, the southern states didn't really feel like they were represented, by no means supporting their ideals, but that's sort of the sociological change that was happening. Again, 58 years later, women's suffrage, so 1920. After this, about 50 years later, the civil rights movement, and then 56 years later, now we're in 2024. So I think what I noticed is there's this growing consensus among consumers that we want to use our personal finances to try and create change, and fundamentally, as I mentioned, comes from sort of a lack of representation in what corporations are doing. And although corporations are fundamentally, like we're all sitting here, fundamentally made up of humans, somehow that representation isn't happening. So if you actually look at the data, right, I've told a nice story, but if you look at the data, what do consumers care about in terms of who do they think is responsible for creating the change? Top one, obviously, is Congress. The second one is the President of the United States, and third is corporations, not really that far behind. So now we'll do some questions at the end, but I want to do a little bit of audience participation, which is, what do you think the percentage of the population that must participate in order to actually create a successful revolution or systemic change? Yeah? 25 to 30%. Okay, 25 to 30%. So there's a really interesting study done by a social scientist at Harvard. First of all, the main finding is that nonviolent protests, nonviolent demonstrations are more successful than violent ones. So when we think about using our spending power, clearly that's a nonviolent protest in a way. And actually, there's this threshold that if 3.5% of the population participates, it almost always creates meaningful change. So for me, especially trying to build this company, I'm like, okay, I don't have to do it all, right? We just need a certain amount of people to actually get the attention. And the reason that we're building a financial company is that in addition to representation, at the end of the day, we all know this, it all comes down to money, right? We have to have economic incentives as consumers, as corporations, government. And fundamentally, I'm gonna use the term Gen Z here, but like, I think they're just a microcosm of what broadly we think about across generations, which is that we're starting to think about money differently. So Gen X, again, like sort of a generalization here, Gen X uses money to buy things. That's the environment they grew up in. Millennials, there's a lot of interesting articles published maybe 10 years ago about how millennials don't care so much about having material things, they care about experiences. And now with Gen Z, what we're seeing is that they want to use their money to create change. And Gen Z is going to be almost 50% of total retail spend by 2030. Just to back this up, right, there's a really interesting public article in the Wall Street Journal. What does Gen Z kind of want out of financial products? Which is they want them to be personalized. So what do I care about? They should reflect their personal values and then have some sense of community. And when you actually poll people about, are you happy with your financial products? Only 34% say, yes, I'm happy. And this is despite, I'm sure you guys see ads all the time, like better interest rates, more bonuses to sign up, better credit cards, more points. And actually, like 1 in 3 Gen Z or young consumers will switch financial institutions every year. So it's not just that people are not happy, they're actually, doing things. They're actually taking action. Okay, so now here's where we get to sort of the sustainability impact piece of this, which is that it started in Europe, initially driven by regulations, but then by consumers, that there are now fintechs, startups that are estimating the carbon footprint of every transaction. So globally, there's now over 100 financial companies that have deployed or are in the process of deploying carbon tracking for consumer transactions. So you look in your banking app and you can see, here's my carbon footprint. Visa and MasterCard are integrating it directly into their networks. And so the question for us is, what's next? There's been a lot of talk about carbon today. Certainly not denying that it's important, but I think if we all think about our personal lives just as humans, we care about more than carbon, right? So what we're building, we call a financial membership for the next generation. Fundamentally, it's a data platform, which I'll talk about briefly in a minute. But what our platform enables you to do is that when you spend your money, you can see your social and environmental impact of every purchase. Additionally, we're all unique, so you can personalize your experience. You can say, I care about being climate neutral, or I care about ethical labor practices, I care about fair wages, women in leadership, values like that, and then you can see if the companies you're buying from actually match those values. And the intention is that if each of us can make small incremental changes, that 17 trillion number we were talking about, we can actually shift. We can actually use our power as consumers to apply pressure, demand on corporations and brands to change. I mentioned the data platform. This is sort of where the tech comes in. We aggregate, synthesize, analyze data using AI, using data scientists from 40 different sources. And what it enables us to do is we've built a free, the data platform itself is free. So anyone can go to our website and you can see for a given company, what's their score, what values do they support, how do they compare to others in their industry. If I'm supporting this one company, are there alternatives that I could buy from? And I think the point that I want to make here is that when people are empowered with the right data, they actually do change their behavior, and they actually do create change. So To date, we've tracked over 2 million purchases, over $233 million, and of our members, over 50% actually change their purchasing habits. So we're just getting started. We offer a financial product. I think I put it in my pocket somewhere. It's a debit card. You can sign up for our membership. You can use it, but in the long run, we integrate with financial institutions. So on your Capital One or Chase or Amex app, essentially, you can see for every purchase, here's the social and environmental impact. You can make changes. You can see recommendations, et cetera. Okay, I wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, so I really just have one more slide, which is what can we do collectively? I talked a lot about consumers signing up to a membership, et cetera, but we definitely see this, there's some talk about partnerships, we see this as a collective effort. So as employers, if you employ people at your company, 70% of workers, especially the young generation, want they actually investigate a company's social and environmental practices before they take a job. So what we're doing is we're, just like you would allocate money into a 401k, we're partnering with employers. You can allocate a certain part of your paycheck onto our spending products, and as an employer, that gives you some ESG awareness. It looks good, and then your employees are happier. We also integrate automated micro donations so that with certain purchase categories, you actually donate. We donate on your behalf using our margin. So for example, if you buy gas on our products, we donate to reforestation. If you dine out, we donate a meal to someone in need. And what we've seen is that donations actually go up by as much as 3x for nonprofits. Corporations, this is sort of a plug to work with us to integrate your data into our platform, because I think transparency is the best way to build trust, sustainable growth. And then, as I mentioned, we long-term just want to integrate with financial institutions. It was never my intention to build a consumer product. It was one day I had my Chase app open, and I was just like, I wish I could see the data on the product I already use. So our data platform is fundamentally built from an API. It's a really easy integration. All we need is a merchant name and transaction amount, and then we can serve up all the impact data directly where your members already see it. So I think the big message here is that, I mean, all of us in this room, in some sense, are leaders, but the next revolution in our society is here, and there are obviously ways that corporations, government, but then also consumers can leverage their power to change that. So that's me. The company's called Karma Wallet. There's still time for questions, so if anybody, I know this topic's maybe a little different than what we've heard before. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I'm Sarah Fuentes. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for this information. I really find it fascinating that it's a B2C platform. It kind of makes me think about B2B platforms like this, just because a lot of us want to work with businesses that have the same values. Is this something that maybe you would consider in the future? That's my first question. And then my second question is how can nonprofits get on your network? I'm the chairwoman of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability. I need to know.
Yeah, sure. We've thought about B2B data and vendor management, supplier purchasing decisions, but there are great companies working in that space. Certainly, we'd be happy to share our data and for anybody that wants to use it to make purchasing decisions within the context of B2B, but that's not something that we're pursuing as a business currently. As it pertains to nonprofits, just come talk to me after. Yeah. Right. Anyone else? Yeah.
To what level of granularity are you doing that? So, for instance, you might not want to shop at Whole Foods, but then what about those bananas and where they came from being out of season? So, what are the...
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way our thesis initially was that, of course, each of us wants to, I want to buy a better made sweatshirt or blazer, but it's just so much cognitive load to think about every purchasing decision and is this good or is it bad? So we started at the brand level. So we basically said fundamentally, do I want to support this company or not? So right now, what we show are that company's values. We get it from publicly available data, we get it from estimates, and we get it from basically proprietary data they give us. We're doing partnerships where we can basically see line item level, SKU level data for retailers, and then show brand values based on those. So I don't know about bananas, but like if you buy some tea or something at Whole Foods, you would not only see ratings and data for Whole Foods, but also for the tea that you purchase. So we don't do that currently, but we will. Yeah.
No, thanks so much. This is really cool. I am a little curious about how you're navigating some of the anti-greenwashing legislation around, particularly in the EU, or even here in the US, where certain companies have had to remove product level claims, like creating these jeans are carbon neutral. And so how do you navigate some of the data availability or greenwashing claims?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we take the approach of we don't actually rate companies. What we do is we take data from amazing organizations that are ratings agencies, nonprofits, even media to some extent, that are doing the great work of sort of investigative journalism, of rankings, of submitting the data. And our intention was that as a consumer, the data is, to some extent, it's out there, right? It's in corporate reports, it's in news articles, it's in these rankings, but then I'm not gonna go actually find all that data, so let's just pull it into one place. So certainly greenwashing is an issue, but the way we address that is just finding verified third-party data vendors, and then whenever we get proprietary data submitted from a company, we basically have like a verified check on our platform where if they have not provided us documentation to support that, they don't get the check.
So after the environmental impact assessment, do you see other assessments you'll put in, like water consumption in the manufacturing of the product, and then that leads to how far up the supply chain are you getting into the assessment of bananas or jeans or whatever?
Yeah, so on the environmental side, there's basically 3 estimates that we do currently. We do carbon estimates, we do water usage estimates, and we do waste creation estimates. Those are all algorithmically generated right now. They're not in partnership with the actual company or assessments of the supply chain. But to the point of SKU level or product level data, eventually we'll partner with the companies manufacturing the products to get insight into their supply chain. I don't know that I don't know that consumers care necessarily about the granularity, but we do want to have the evidence to back up our claims.
So if you view yourself, let's say, as a consumer reports for karma or for environment, and I'm a company and you rate me badly, and I disagree with that, would I sue you? Would you be trustworthy? Would you have the mechanisms to say that what you publish to others is actually truthful?
Yeah.
And you yourself, are you not investing in one of the companies that you recommend? I mean, all of these type of questions, because the minute you interfere in the pathway of an economy, there are a lot of forces that turn on you. Right now, you may be too small for that.
Yeah.
But try it on one of the large companies and just say, well, they're deep red and it's one of the very big companies. You will have a lot of visitors.
Exactly. I mean,
Legal
to some extent, I think being polarizing helps. To the sort of the greenwashing point, although we show ratings, we show values, we don't ourselves make any claims about the companies, and we can point to data that we're referencing that's validated, verified. We can show the documentation for all of that. So when a company, and we get this quite often actually, people come and say like, hey, was our rating bad? We're doing better things than you're saying. Our response is basically like, look, we have aggregated, analyzed, synthesized what is publicly available. But we know that's not everything you're doing, so please work with us, show us the data, show us the documentation, we'd be happy to update your profile. So yeah, we'll see what happens as we grow, but that's our approach for now. Last question, I think.
Okay, great. Thank you. I am really curious to know. I know you're saying like the younger generations are obviously becoming more conscious and putting their money where their purchasing decisions are with their values. I'm curious, like where you're seeing sort of opportunity to create more of an embodied sense of this, the connection between planet and like our own bodies and planet and our own communities in your research.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by embodied?
Yeah, obviously, like, we have microplastics in the ocean. We've got, glyphosate on our, organic berries that are not meant to have them because of how the wind blows, et cetera. And I'm just curious if you've been looking at that from like a relevancy perspective for the population that isn't just moved by sort of the revolutionary aspect of from like a social cause, and also from like an embodiment perspective in terms of our own health and well-being as individuals and community.
So we're starting to build sort of like a content team to start communicating some of that. I think it's challenging because that those sort of things can be sensationalized sometimes in the media. So I don't have a great answer for you, but I think a lot of what we do is just consumer education. So whether it's education about news topics like that, findings, whether it's about the brands. I don't know if that's answering your question, but yeah, I think there's sort of the niche audience that will sign up to this kind of product or use this kind of data initially. And then there's a lot of just education that not only we have to do, but as a market to say, like, this is what's happening, and these are the downstream implications of where you're putting your money. So, yeah. Awesome. Thank you.